Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, MMA Junkie's weekly show where we go through the biggest topics in the mixed martial arts world and beyond. Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Segura. I will be your host for today, temporarily replacing here and filling in for George Garcia. Yes, I'm gorgeous, but I am not George Garcia. So welcome to the show. So today in this episode, we'll be going over the UFC St. Louis results. A lot going on there. It was a pretty good card. We'll be going over as well as the state of the UFC Apex shows in 2024. And yes, a lot to talk about there. We'll be going over as well of Matt Brown's retirement, given that, he's one of the bigger names in this sport, a true veteran of the sport walking away. And we'll be going over as well as the weekend preview. We got Bellator coming back, plus UFC coming back again this weekend. So we'll be going over those fights and giving you guys a short preview. Joining me today to discuss all this, we got a pretty stacked panel today. We got Mike Bong from Toronto, Canada. Mike, how are you?
I'm good, man.
We got Matt Wells. Matt, how you doing?
Doing great, man.
We got Dan Tom, who's got the energy here and representing all the way from Las Vegas. How are you, Dan? Good to have you back.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, guys.
Awesome, guys. So really excited to talk to you guys about this UFC St. Louis card. Pretty good, honestly, going into it. My expectation was fairly low. It wasn't like the most stacked card, but it turned out to be a pretty damn good event. So let's start with the main event here. Derrick Lewis wins by KO once again, has probably the most outrageous post-fight celebration. Let's just talk about that. Is that the most ridiculous post-fight celebration we've seen? I mean, he mooned the crowd. He took off his shorts. He threw the cup to the media row. That was just bananas. That's probably the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think I said it a while ago. If MMA is going to have its NFL Janet Jackson halftime show wardrobe malfunction, I mean, how do you not make Derrick Lewis a minus 5,000 favorite to represent us? I mean, at this point, the guy's going to come out and do Marky Mark from Boogie Nights next, and hey, who's going to stop him?
Anyone else? What are the odds that we get odds next time around, whether he takes his shorts off or not post-fight celebration? I feel like that's somewhere in some betting site is going to be an open wager.
Well, it feels like it's happening every time now. It's definitely up there with the top celebrations. Although I do remember the one at the UFC Apex, I think when he beat Chris Daukaus and he threw the cup into the crowd, and I think someone did a cuppy out of it and drank some beer out of it. So that seems to like be a level above this. If that media member he threw it at in the crowd had a beer, I maybe wouldn't put it past him. He already sniffed it and had Lewis and Dana White's sign it. So I don't really know if there's any limits in that man's mind, but yeah, Derrick Lewis has done this stuff before, and it seems like he just keeps leveling it up. The crowd encourages them, the big win. I would say it's probably the best celebration since the last Derrick Lewis one, and then probably until the next one. Look at that. Look at these Derrick Lewis fans here. Beautiful.
Matt, what are the odds we see this on eBay, and are you putting in a bid for it?
No, I will not. I mean, first off, like just mentioning the fact like that the media members like just straight up sniff the cup is just wild activity going on right there.
Reporting, he had to confirm.
Craziness. But listen, I honestly thought, I was like, the way he took his shorts off and then like started mooning and like started reaching, I was like, dude, don't unleash the other black beast as well. Like I want to keep this. I don't want to see this, pop up on screen. So, keep those sensors, ready anytime Derrick Lewis is on screen after a win these days. So, man, it was funny. It was hilarious. It was everything that we love from Derrick Lewis because he's just going to hit you with something over the top every time and try to top his last celebration. But I thought we were going to go too far with this one. I'm glad he didn't know.
Yeah, we've seen brawls, we've seen twerking, we've seen all kinds of weird moves. I mean, but this was something else. MMA, man. What a sport. Guys, so let's get into the actual action here. Let's get into the actual results. So pretty big win for Derrick Lewis, who, he's obviously a big name, but was coming off a loss. His career in recent years has kind of not been the greatest. Yes, he's been at the top billing of many cards, but he's also taking a lot of else throughout. But here he comes back, picks up a finish, says he's in his prime. Let's start there. Are we seeing the start of something here with Derrick Lewis? Where is he at in his career? Because he's certainly an interesting character here.
Let me see. Let's see. I want to categorize Derrick Lewis as just one of those guys at this point that's going to be the he's going to be the guy that you can put into headliners and attract fans, and he's going to draw interest. But I'm not sure if he has that title run in him, because the results they're way too mixed against the top level competition. The guys that are really hungry to chase after the title, the Spivaks, the Pavloviches, even that banger against Tai Tuivasa, as wild as that was, and Ty's had his own mixed results. It just seems that Derrick Lewis is going to give you an exciting fight no matter what, anytime. Results be damned. It kind of reminds me of the tail end of Anderson Silva's career to an extent, that we wanted to see him in fun fights against quality of opposition, but if he lost, like, we really didn't care. We're like, all right, we'll see the next one. It's just, we kind of just hope that there's no like severe injuries or anything like that come out of it. But at the end of the day, you know what you're going to get with Derrick Lewis. You're going to get an entertaining fight. He's going to go out there. He's going to try to knock his opponent's head off. He's going to throw some wild jumping switch kicks just to prove that he can do that, as big as he is. And, the results are, it's kind of like a thing where you just throw the cards up in the air and, you play the hand that you're dealt at the end of the day. But as fans, we're all going to enjoy the results, I think, no matter what. It's just like, I'm not sure if he has a title run in him. I don't know if anyone else feels any different.
Mike, what do you think? He's clearly a big name, right? That always helps in terms of getting title shots and whatnot. But I mean, the heavyweight division does seem to be pretty stacked right now. Probably the best it's been in some time.
Yeah, that and the fact, I mean, it's also just a crapshoot though, right? Because we have, who knows when we're getting the next title fight. It might not be till November, it sounds like, with what Dana White said at the press conference with John Jones and Stipe. And then, if the winner of that fight's Tom Aspinall, you're looking at maybe first quarter of next year. And then someone like Derrick Lewis, whoever kind of comes up behind them to make themselves a contender, they're looking at late next year for maybe a fight. So for Derrick Lewis, the way he's active, that could be 2-3 more fights. If he wins those all, then yeah, he'd be on like a 4-fight, 5-fight winning streak, and he would be worthy of a title shot. Obviously would depend on the competition. He's going to need like a legit, probably top 5 guys somewhere in there. I don't know which one of those he hasn't fought or lost to already. So it's like a tricky time, but yeah, like he could get the title shot like Dustin Poirier is getting the title shot against Islam Makhachev, right? Timing, someone else who is more worthy doesn't have, the right timing for it, wants more money, various things that we always talk about with these fights coming together where it doesn't work. He's always someone you could go to that's going to sell, that has the chance of a big knockout. So I wouldn't completely rule it out, but we've kind of, I think, come to see the product that Derrick Lewis is, and you never know what to believe with him, right? Like, he comes in saying, I'm in the best shape of my life. I got this fixed. I had this issue. I did this. And you're like, okay, maybe it's really the time. And then he's like, well, I have 10 more pounds to cut. And then you remember a few years ago where he's like, I want to get down to like 250 in fight weight, so I'm not cutting any weight. So he's just all over the map. You don't know what to believe for him, if it's a good performance, bad performance. So I'm glad to see him get a win. The sport is better when he's winning. We're more entertained, all that stuff. But I think like Derrick Lewis's best lane right now is what we've kind of seen these past couple wins, fighting the people like Rodrigo Nascimento, Marcos Rogerio de Lima, ones that he probably has a decent chance of winning, but is not completely like ruled out in it. So I kind of like this road for Derrick Lewis at this stage in his career, but if he keeps winning, eventually you find yourself in those bigger fights. So we'll see if he can do that.
So if you were in the UFC's position, if you were in their advisory board, you would just be headlining random events with them and knocking random people out. That's what you're saying. You wouldn't necessarily try to set them up for a title shot, for a title run.
I mean, to a degree, right? Like, I think the one in my matchmaker column that I said makes sense is Derrick Lewis versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, which is a fight that somehow hasn't happened. Derrick Lewis is being ranked the entire time Rozenstruik has been in the UFC since 2019, and they haven't even been booked against each other. It's not like one of those weird ones where they've been booked and it fell apart. So to me, that feels like the right way. Rozenstruik is obviously kind of a proven top 10 guy. If he wins that, then there's obviously a natural step forward with that. So that to me would be the right thing. That could headline a fight card in an arena or at the Apex, and you're good to go.
Dan, let me ask you this. He said he's in his prime, but we don't know what to believe from Derrick Lewis. He says a lot of things, right? But as an analyst here at MMA Junkie, like, you saw that fight. Did you see anything different? Did you see anything that he added on that maybe can add some truth to those comments that he's in his prime, that maybe there could be another gear or two to his career?
No, you guys nailed it. You can never listen to what Derrick Lewis says. And it actually is believable for him to go down in weight, because if you look at him, not just like in his one submission win against Raheem Cleveland, where he's hitting a ninja armbar, go look that up on YouTube, or even in his first UFC debut, the guy came in much lighter weight. And here's how crazy it is: going down in Brazil to fight 5 rounds on short notice against the jail man. Derrick Lewis, if you go back to that fight, that's actually the most best shape, closest to a 6-pack that you'll ever see Derrick Lewis in, and it was in short notice in Brazil. This man makes no sense. He makes no sense at all. What makes perfect sense is what Mike Bond said. I was laughing because like Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Derrick Lewis is like a wet dream for the matchmakers. Like their fetishization at this point, and I'm not trying to shame them. You can be into whatever you want, folks, but it's let's be honest. It's clear that like Dana White loves 2006. Where, he thinks that's that, it's for a guy who doesn't look back and doesn't have feelings. He loves going, matchmaking, and through that perspective, the matchmakers love 185 and above. Like it's still Anderson Silva, 2007 era up in this B. So yeah, of course they're going to roll out Jairzinho Rozenstruik for another 5-round staring contest or another heavyweight that doesn't have a style, though is barely deserving, because the UFC has traditionally underserved this division forever. And in their defense, they are now trying to finally manifest some heavyweight prospects, but we'll tell you how those top prospects are going when we get to the way they decided to, God forbid, for whatever reason, open this main card with. Sorry.
Dan, I think we all know how you feel about, heavyweights and wanting to see some more shine on the lighter weight classes, but I'll actually clap back a little bit at this. Derrick Lewis is a star, right? Like Derrick Lewis, out of all the names right now in terms of the heavyweight division, Derrick Lewis is one of the few that rings a bell, that people like, that people tune to watch. That's a guy you have to put on a headliner, no?
Yeah, you're right for Derrick Lewis, but I do warn you, for this matchup in particular, it's going to be like another Ngannou Lewis. These are two counter strikers who like don't do anything until it's time to do something, and I think that's why they get a lot of accolades for their game, but really we're just looking at their highlight reel. Whether you're looking at someone unentertaining like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who's probably going to kill me for always using him for these like monotonous fight night headliner examples, or somebody who's exciting and a fan favorite, to Danny's point, like Derrick Lewis. If you really break down the footage, it's only exciting when the exciting things are happening. And when you pair Derrick Lewis with another striker or a counter striker, you actually get the worst matchups. Everyone's worried about Derrick Lewis getting grappled. Like those are the matchups he does the best in, and B are the most entertaining. So it makes perfect sense. I completely agree with Mike, and I know the UFC matchmakers agree with Mike. I'm just warning everybody that we're gonna not only we're gonna get it, you guys are gonna regret getting it. You're gonna be even more upset because my annoying butt was right again.
Yeah, I think I said that in my matchmaker column. It's going to be those two fighting. It's going to be a terrible fight until the knockout happens, and we'll forget everything that happened before then.
Mm-hmm.
Smart man.
And Dan, one more question. So we just discussed how like a title shot maybe is not likely, but it's certainly around there just because he's a big name, and if he can continue winning, like that's always a possibility. But let me ask you this: in terms of like skills wise, is there something that he can do? Because he's got a lot to work with, right? That knockout power is ridiculous. He's got a big name. Apparently, jiu-jitsu doesn't work on him, which is very bizarre. Like he's got some things going for him that could propel him to get good victories and get wins over quality opponents. But what is missing from what you've seen, losing to Pavlovich, losing to these top guys? What can he add for him to perhaps unlock that and maybe, I don't know, one day in an alternate universe become champion?
It sounds crazy for me to say that the all-time KO leader in heavyweight and beyond needs to not focus as much on his striking. But in my defense, if you look at it, most of those KO victories from Derrick Lewis, even the more greener Derrick Lewis, comes from ground and pound. And as you see in the highlight, beautifully done by our guy Kenny, of Derrick Lewis hitting that inside trip. In his defense, guys, he has shown some improvements to answer Danny's previous question that he lobbed at me. And it's been in the wrestling, and to tie that in with the answer to Danny's question now, I think that's what he's got to focus on. Ground and pound and wrestling. There's not many grapplers at heavyweight. Why do you think John Jones moved up there? There's like 3 people who wrestle, and like maybe 2, considering Blades really doesn't wrestle much offensively anymore. Like the division is wide open. I'm not making fun of heavyweight to make fun of heavyweight. Like it really lacks the depth in certain areas. And if Lewis can fill that depth with his ground and pound and wrestling, I think that's his best shot.
Hey, and he didn't do too bad against Nascimento in the grappling department. Imagine if he actually wrestled and started doing that. Like that'd be a much more scarier individual. So Jairzinho Rozenstruik, we got Dan says yay, or well, he's somewhat partially split. Mike likes the option. Matt, what do you think? What should be next for Derrick Lewis?
Listen, if we were thinking logically, here, and if the UFC and Derrick Lewis want to go on a title run, the matchup that makes the most sense to me, I guess, the secondary matchup, because I like the Rosenstrike fight a lot. But if we were thinking logically about how things have been playing out, another person Derrick Lewis has not fought is Stipe Miocic. So that should be the fight. Because Stipe hasn't fought in forever. He hasn't fought since the pandemic, hasn't won since the pandemic, rather, right? Derrick Lewis, Stipe, the winner of that will be set up for a title shot. It would be a fight that would make a lot more sense if you're trying to sell a Stipe John Jones fight, right? So that would be the fight that I would be more on board with than anything else. I think if you're talking Stipe, you're talking title shots. Same with Derrick Lewis. I think that fight would make a lot more sense. But of course, for whatever reason, the UFC, John Jones and Stipe are married to that matchup that seemingly nobody else wants.
Yeah, maybe they can fight for the interim belt.
Yeah.
I don't know how Ohio's economy is doing, but maybe if they can cough up one of the UFC exorbitant site fees, maybe that'll help Stipe's case, because that seems to, be the only thing to get some traction going these days. Money talks, baby.
Yeah, certainly. All right, any closing thoughts on this performance, on his win? Shall we move on to the co-main event?
Yep.
All right, so let's talk 170. Joaquin Buckley continues to kill it at 170. To be honest, I did not see this coming. I probably expected some improvement. It's dropping down a weight class. Obviously, he was a shorter guy at 185, and I thought he would do better so long as he could make the weight. But I did not expect this from him. 4-0 and quickly turning into a contender. Let's not forget, the guy he beat this Saturday, probably not the biggest name, but prior to that, he had stopped Vicente Luque, who's been a longtime contender and not so long ago a top 5 welterweight in the world. Are you guys surprised with the success that Joaquin Buckley is having today at 170 pounds? Mike, let's go to you.
A little bit, but not completely. I mean, he's looked good since dropping down. It's just been building and building with the better performances. The Vicente Luque one, I think, told us a lot. And this one, he overcame a lot too. I mean, the size discrepancy was ridiculous with Ruzabeov. Obviously, that guy can hit like a truck too. He came in with 10 straight first round finishes. So for Buckley to win the way that he did was pretty solid. But now is where it gets interesting, right? Like, he's kind of dabbled with some of these guys in the division who are maybe slightly more stylistically friendly, but he's going out there and he's trying to wrestle in some of these fights like he did in this particular one. It's going to be much harder to do against Sean Brady, against Colby Covington, Shavkat, Bilal, like all these guys up there. I know there's a few strikers, Jack Del Maddalena, Ian Gary and stuff like that could be a little more suitable to him, and maybe he could replicate this type of game plan. But yeah, these guys above him are tough. It's going to be, I think this is where we really find out, right? Like, is this his ceiling right now with this win? Maybe. If he could beat any of the guys upward from here on, then I think it starts to get really impressive. And I liked his call out of Gilbert Burns, the second call out, the one of Conor McGregor. Doesn't even deserve our conversation at this point. So hopefully this is the only time it's mentioned. But Gilbert Burns, I think, is a great fight.
Mike, I got bad news for you. We will discuss it in a few seconds. But first, let's go to Dan. Dan, what are you seeing from Joaquin Buckley? Look, he's not much of a wrestler. We saw him use his wrestling effectively this time around, ground and pound. I feel like he's kind of taking his career a little bit more seriously in terms of I can be a lot more than just an exciting fighter. I don't know if you see that from him, and what are you seeing from him technically that could maybe put him among the best, and I don't know, maybe one day fight for the title. I mean, 4-0 at welterweight, that's no joke.
Listen, I think Buckley's been showing some noted improvements in his wrestling. Good call there, Danny. Since arguably the Abdul Razak Al Hassan fight, and ironically enough, since dropping down to welterweight, usually people focus more on the weight, less on the skills. But he's doing better at not following on straight lines as much and kind of taking better angles. And that's been making him harder to counter, which is where you see Buckley suffer a lot of his knockout losses. So he's making improvements, and I want to say that. And I also want to say that I'm really happy for him. I think that was a really feel-good moment. Love me some Joaquin Buckley, but if I got to answer honestly and critically as an analyst, I'm still not sold, and I think this is going to be maybe arguably the peak. And I don't want to take away. That's why I wanted to start with positives. But as much as I love, Buckley, as much as I love Vicente Luque, let's be honest, man. Luque kind of, especially rewatching that, he kind of gave it up, man. I hate to say that. He's been in a lot of wars. He's had brain bleeds. Like, he has all the right to have, any kind of, sketchy performance, second thoughts, whatever it may be. It's just speculation here, just going off what I see, folks. But what I see wasn't good. What I see, we can't take a lot from. And with Ruzaboya, part of the reason why I picked Buckley and even played him even as chalk, but not exactly the guy you like to do that as, was because I wasn't sold on Ruzaboyev. I think we have a lot of this, infatuation with anybody who wears a cultural hat from any kind of Eastern Europe nation or anything like, the Caucasus or anything like that. We go crazy for, right? Anyone who speaks a little Russian, we go crazy for. We think everybody's the next Khabib. And it wasn't that. You guys look at this guy's regional record. He fought a lot of cans, except unlike, Khabib and these other great fighters, he didn't beat those cans. He was losing. In fact, 7 of his 8 losses on his pro record, Ruzaboyev was at welterweight. I did not like this for him at all, especially impromptu on short notice. I haven't made this weight since 2021. So in Ruzaboyev's defense, I don't know how much we can judge from him. And even at his best, I did not rate him that high. So therefore, in this picture, you got to be careful about overrating this 4-fight win streak for Buckley, as happy as I am to see him on it.
Okay. So let's talk about the call out. Mike's favorite question here, but first we'll go to Matt Wells. Was it a good move or a bad move? Because clearly, in my opinion, he came out as like the biggest superstar. I know Derrick Lewis had his own thing, but he was the hometown guy. Co-main event, he looked good, great performance, but then calls out Conor McGregor. Some people loved it, some others didn't. What did you think about it?
I mean, he really took us on a roller coaster, like with his whole presentation, this event, right? He pulled on your heartstrings a little bit about the story with his grandmother and ALS and all that stuff, and then flips the script and goes with the over the top call out of Conor McGregor. I didn't love it because Conor's not in that space right now. Conor's in a different place in his career. He's going to show up maybe once, maybe twice total. He's not here to contend. He's not here to fight for the titles. He's here to headline an event, take another big bag, and then, right off into the sunset, do another movie, whatever he's going to do, Conor McGregor things. If Conor was in the earlier stages of his career when he was still on the rise up, and if he was in the same weight class back then, that's another thing. Another reason why I didn't like this, because we're talking about a former featherweight champion being called out by a former middleweight. I don't love it, but I just think Conor's in a very different place right now, obviously in his career.
Yeah. And
if Joaquin Buckley is a guy that we see as a potential title challenger, so I would have liked if he would have just straight out came out with the Gilbert Burns call out in the cage there. Sure, the Conor McGregor one is going to, grab some more attention, I guess, in tweets and mentions and stuff like that on social media. But in terms of career paths and stuff like that, I think the Burns call out would have played better there in the cage in that moment.
Mike, I know you had some thoughts, so let's hear it.
It's just a miss, obviously. Like, Conor McGregor isn't in his realm. If you want to shoot your shot, that's fine, but you only get that moment once, right? Like, it's valuable cage time. The crowd is going insane, as you said it well, Danny. Like, he came off like a superstar. He came up much bigger than Joaquin Buckley ever has, especially, even going back to that viral kick knockout he had. Like, this was kind of the pinnacle for him, and he uses it to call out Conor McGregor, who is obviously not going to fight him. Didn't even acknowledge it, despite him questioning his, I guess, family bloodline and all that stuff. So I don't know.
Mike, what about the SEO though? What about the SEO?
Do I need to pull up the numbers from his stories that we wrote about it? I don't think it's buying us all extra bonuses for the quarter or anything like that. So I don't really know like what it actually did. He gets in there a little bit. We made the graphics, but like, go look at the comments. It's all like, what are you doing, man? So he came there, he acknowledged that it wasn't realistic and said, let me call it someone more realistic. So I'm fine with it. He came down to earth a little bit. We were able to get that out there, do all the social stuff as well. And I think it was received a lot better. So I'm not going to give him too hard of a time, but like, discussing it as a serious possibility is just a waste of time to me.
Brutal performance. I do think that damped it a little bit. I wish I would have gotten that Gilbert call out just straight up. But I'll say this: if you're gonna call out Conor McGregor, double down on it. Don't call him out and then a few minutes later backstage be like, "Yeah, I know I'm not gonna get it. Here's my second or my plan B." You got to double down on it, man. You can't just resort to that. Guys, real quick, what is next for Buckley? Let's go around. Let's start with Matt. You had to play matchmaker here. Who would you put him up against and why?
Burns is the fight for me. Burns is the guy who's been on that skid, right? And he's trying to get his footing. And I think that will answer a lot of questions for us, kind of like some of the ones that we've already asked. Where is he really at this point at 170? Buckley, that is, right? Is he going to be that serious contender next? And I think that's a great opponent to answer that question.
Dan, you're muted. Sorry. I'm sure it was a great idea, but
yeah, I'm sure it's a great matchup. I think I agree with Matt. I think that's kind of perfect with the 4-fight win streak. You justify it from that angle, and yeah, I just think it's a fun matchup in general that'll produce some action.
Okay. Unanimous here, Mike?
Yeah, I'm inclined to do that. If you wanted to do someone like Jeff Neal or Wonder Boy, like those would be fine too.
Jeff Neal would be a banger. I like that one.
Yeah, that'd be fun as well. If Kevin Holland was staying at welterweight, I don't know what his plans are with this short notice fight at UFC 302. I think a rematch there between those two, there's some history, could be fun. But yeah, I think the one with Gilbert Burns is like the biggest test, especially Gilbert Burns doing interviews saying like, I'll fight anyone. I don't care about rankings, up, down, whatever it may be. I just want to get back on track. You take that for someone who's a couple spots lower, Buckley, and give him the chance to elevate himself. So to me, all angles, the fight with Gilbert Burns makes the most sense.
Yeah. Real quick, guys, any other performances you would like to highlight? There were some great finishes out there, some important divisional results as well. Anything you would like to point out? Let's start with Mike.
Ooh, I mean, there's a few. I'll go with Esteban Ribovics, who knocked out Terrence McKinney with one of the nicest head kicks you will ever see. Just happened fully in motion, in the middle of a great combination. Got Terrence Saline directly into it and then punted his head into the bleachers. I think the bigger point is, though, this man was robbed of a $50,000 bonus. I mean, you KO someone like that in 37 seconds. What more do you have to do? He didn't miss weight. He didn't do anything to screw it up in that regard. So I'm wondering what the conversation was with Dana White and Hunter Campbell and Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard, where they decide to not go with him. And I wish someone in the press conference had kind of called Dana out on that miss, because he definitely deserved it. And kind of took everything that Terrence McKinney was making his MO, right? Like, I'm the guy who comes in and finishes dudes in a matter of seconds in brutal fashion. And then he did that to Terrence and has a track record of it as well. He's just now able to show it on the stage. So good for him.
Dan?
Great shout out, man. Yeah, Ribovic, obviously, Ribovic, if he would have head kicked a media member or gotten bit by Terrence McKinney, then perhaps Dana White maybe would have shelled it out. But in the spirit of people who don't deserve things not getting what they deserve, or, the deserved people not getting what they deserve, how about Tabitha Ricci getting that decision over Tisha Torres, who Tisha Torres now gets screwed twice in a row? She should be on a massive winning streak if the judges didn't mess up her Dern fight, if they actually gave counter striking and weren't swayed by the woo-woo stuff. But I'm sorry, as much as y'all hate the gamblers saying robbery, which they say it too much, and I never use that word, I will actually use it here as somebody who likes to consider myself down the middle. Yes, there's bias attached to this one, but for what it's worth, one of the only media members that actually go through the judging training courses and spend time with these people, having conversations, taking the courses. And yeah, under no criteria, even under 2007, Diego Sanchez robbing Martin Kampman criteria, but still, it was up there. It was up there no matter what level of criteria. I don't know how you justified the score. Curious if you guys are going to do a judge is going to judge. I'd be interested on reading that. But yeah, I will happily sit down with anybody if they want to challenge me, and we can score and talk logic for logic on that one. That was crazy. That was crazy.
Matt, give us one highlight of the night.
Carlos Ulberg, to me, that's a guy I'm very high on, and I have been for a few years now. Also considering the team, who he trains with and everything like that, his steady improvement has just been impressive to me. And to go out there and just starch, Alonzo Minofield in 12 seconds, taking advantage of his reckless, blitz forward. It's impressive stuff. Can't wait to see, what this guy's career unfolds, into becoming. Because, like I said, I've been high on him for a few years, so he's been one of my, I guess, dark horses of the division, so to speak.
Yeah, guys, let's move on to topic number 2, and it's kind of related to St. Louis and kind of a good transition to what we will see this weekend. The Apex shows, right? Clearly, the crowd, at least in my opinion, made a big difference in the results, in the knockouts, in just everything. I mean, how Joaquin Buckley came across, right? I mean, just seeing the public really react to him makes you realize, wow, this guy's a superstar. This guy's beloved, and it certainly bolsters his status, in my opinion. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but was this maybe the most abrupt or like the biggest difference that we've seen between the Epic shows and a show? I know there's also pay-per-views involved and whatnot, but I feel like with this specific show, we really got to see the difference between the Apex and when they're on the road, the UFC.
Yeah, I mean they they packed the house pretty early, right? Like they did it strategically. They put some of those St. Louis fighters early in the night, so got the crowd out. And yeah, man, like this is the stuff we miss. It just enhances the atmosphere in so many different ways. The fighters, like, we'll get into Dana's comments after, but we posted, some social stuff about those comments about doing less shows in the Apex, and just go look through the comments. There's multiple fighters in there that's like, it's tough fighting in the Apex, like blah blah blah. You see who liked it, how many of the fighters liked those comments. Like you can see it's not just us, it's not just the fans. The fighters want to be out there too, and they appreciate these moments so much more. So yeah, I mean, we can get into the rest of it now, but that's just kind of my thoughts on the question there and the difference in atmosphere.
Guys, I was just thinking, imagine if Joaquin Buckley would have hit that spinning knockout of the year, knockout of the history of the UFC in St. Louis, just any crowd, but specifically St. Louis. Like, he would be just a superstar right now, right? The Apex kind of robbed them of him becoming a bigger deal. But I want to go to Dan real quick because I know he's a bit of a fight nerd. So I feel like you like, there's something about the Apex that you like, right? Is there something that we're missing here that can be appreciated about the silence? I don't know, some listening to the corners. Is there something that you like about it?
No, I've kind of grown sick of it too, to be honest. I don't feel like we get the honest performances because like when I would have to like break down fights, I would not just because I don't watch Tough and I don't want to watch Tough, but it really was no value because you're in a quiet environment. The Tough fights, you don't have your coaches or whatever. At least you have your coaches here. Oh, and in the Apex, you have your family members for one fight. Could you imagine Rebovic's family like being there for the KO, then having to be escorted outside while Rebovic waits to get a what do you call this by not getting a bonus? Imagine that kind of a night in the Apex, huh? Oh boy. But also it's really annoying because, if you want to talk about some of the referee mishaps or the judge mishaps, we talk about the fighters, right? We're like, oh, how is it compared to fighting in the Apex compared to not? Like, and there's all these different performance differences. Some fighters like it, some don't, some do better, some do worse. Well, guess who else are human beings who are performing, guys? The judges and the refs. And I feel like even we're seeing with veteran refs and veteran judges, are they off their games with these live shows. We're seeing way more fumbles at these live shows. If you guys have been paying attention, whether it's like non-stoppages and this and that, maybe a benefit of the Apex is they're less clouded by the crowd. They can get a better eye on the action. I don't know what that is from perspective. They would have to answer that, but I have noticed they've been performing poor. That being said, give me the live shows, man. They're way better for the crowd, way better for the fighters. It's way better for everybody involved. Stop being cheap. You're certainly charging enough of a gate to justify these UFC. So if these poor family members are going to have to buy inflated tickets, regardless if it's the Apex, if they're going to have to travel regardless, how about they at least get to stay in their seat for the whole time? A feature that the Apex doesn't even allow for the fighters' family members. I don't know.
UFC St. Louis broke the record for the most profitable or the biggest gate as far as the fight night goes. So there's that too, as you mentioned. Guys, let's go real quick to a Dana White clip because not only did we pick this up, but also the media members in attendance, as well as Dana White. And he had something to say about this.
When you think about how we built this business, it was taking it out of, the big markets. Like when we first got into the fight business, everybody just went to Vegas, Atlantic City, sometimes New York, sometimes LA. That's the only place that really had fights, unless you had a local kid that would fight in some, we built this business taking this thing to every city all over the world. And, as we start to get our shit together, I will call it, and start to move out and start to, go to these different cities like we used to, the whole sport just goes to another level.
Matt, cap or no cap?
I mean, at this point, it's got to be cap, right? Because he's been saying this for years, but it's tough, right? Because if you look at it from a business side of things, like for the UFC, it makes sense to keep running Apex shows because it's a lot easier lift on their end. But also, I think there's a point of diminishing returns, and I think we've kind of hit that as well, because you built your brand of the UFC of having these traveling events, going to city, country to country across the globe, crowd pans and sea of people and like cheering for all these big fights and everything. That's the kind of stuff that makes you say, I want to go buy a ticket and be a part of that environment, not a part of, being at the Apex where there's 12 people clapping and there's zero reaction to post-fight interviews when guys are trying to be energetic and they're like, give me a hell yeah. And it's just like crickets, it's sort of things. It's like, you got to have the excitement of the crowd, just even reacting to little things that you really don't necessarily think of. Like when they show replays between rounds, you can hear the crowd reacting to that, right? Stuff like that gets missed at the Apex. I mean, the only redeeming quality for me on the Apex for certain matchups is having the smaller cage, because that benefits the fight, right?
Yeah.
But everything else, you got to be there for the crowd, man. That's what helps build stars. When you have these performances in front of crowds, the crowd gets excited about the finish, like Esteban Ribovic, right? And then you get on the mic and you deliver an emphatic promo. People are going to remember that. People are going to remember the crowd reaction. It's going to play better in future promo packages for that fighter. That builds a star. And I know the UFC doesn't necessarily want to build stars up too big, right? Because it's all about the 3 letters above everybody else. But at the same time, this is how you build fighters up to build bigger gates for the future, to get that next level of stardom. You have to be in front of crowds. You can't do this in the Apex anymore. You got to get out.
Yeah. And I feel like I agree with you, Matt. I feel like I've been hearing Dana White say this for so many years now, since, the pandemic. We got to get out. We got to get out. We got to get out. Yet here we are, 2024, 16 shows in, and half of them have been at the UFC Apex. But Mike, let me go to you and ask you this. One thing saying, okay, yeah, we got to get out there. We will. But another thing is, can they? I don't want to sound disrespectful, and I always hate framing these questions because sometimes it sounds like we're taking a shot at the fighters. But let's be honest, the quality of a lot of these Apex cards have not been the best, right? If you're going to go to any city, you got to sell tickets. The arenas, right? They cost money. Do you feel like they can go to they can take these Apex shows out on the road?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for sure, because roster depth is definitely a challenge for them right now. But it's always kind of been this way. Like even pre-pandemic, they were going on the road like every weekend. And I'm inclined to sit here and be like, well, look at some of these Apex cards. Like half the dudes are from Contender Series, are tough. 3/4 of the people on the card are coming off a loss or making their debut. Like, this is horrible. How do you sell this in an arena for X amount of dollars a ticket? But go back and look some of these like pre-pandemic cards. Some of them were like that too. Like I remember it was in 2014. It was like a significant moment when they went to New Zealand and headlined a card with Nate Marquardt versus James Tahuna. And it was the first UFC event ever where both fighters were coming off back-to-back losses. And that was like a meaningful moment. And now that's like routine stuff, right? To have co-main events, main events, 3-fight losing streaks. Like it happens a lot more now, but they're able to pull some of this stuff off because they have name fighters. Like they can throw Derrick Lewis in a main event off 3 straight losses, and a lot of people don't blink an eye if it's like in the Apex. I think if you strategically do it, you can find cities that will sell at these venues, places that are desperate for sports content. Go to a South Carolina or a Nebraska or something like that doesn't have like a big pro sports team, and they can make this happen. It's just about the proper card construction. But I do think the demand is out there for them, and they can pull this off. It's just a matter of, building it the right way and getting the right main events. But they've been through all this before. They've done it. I think it can be done, and I hope more people get the live event opportunity, because I will say this so many times. One of the things that Dana White is absolutely correct on is if you are like a fringe fan getting more into it and you've never been to a live UFC event, once you go, it changes the game for you. You become a full-blown addict, hardcore fan, and I would like to see more people globally get that opportunity to see this live, because that helps build the sport up too. But I won't say Apex is completely useless. It has its values. Obviously, tough Contender Series should be there. That makes sense. If you want to throw one card a month or one card every 6 weeks there to put maybe the lowest of the low level people you owe fights to, contractually, I'm okay with that. But right now, I would like to see more shows on the road for all the reasons that being said in this segment. But I do know that there's a value for the Apex. I'd just like to see them use it in a more productive way, I guess.
Yeah. Dan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think Mike nailed it when he said card construction. I do believe they can do it. They have the roster depth. Unfortunately, TKO, who is also the one pushing for them to go back on the road, I'm assuming, because Dana White's been doing the same song and dance. It's like I think you should leave me, but we got to find the guy who did this. And that's what essentially he's doing up there. But card construction, they can do it. It's card construction. I know I complain about it, guys, and we saw how roaring the prelims are because they put all the good fights on there. They actually might have to try, and you see that they do try differently, but even better as far as like, again, oh, Dan's being a hipster and annoying, and he keeps complaining about 185 to heavyweight opening the main card. Well, look what happened on the heavyweight main opener. Big guys, big low-level heavyweight slop fest went to decision and killed the
Shittiest
momentum
fight
that
of the
we
night
beautifully
bonus.
had. Yeah, then we had, it's such a crucial spot. Joe Silva put 145 and 155 99.99999% of the time for a reason. Say what you will about that little diminutive monster. He knew how to structure a card, goddammit. Bring Joe Silva back. Go ahead, flame me, matchmakers. Stop your big man infested. You give us some 145 and 155, because when we bring back onto the road, we're going to have less of an opportunity to give people like Lerone Murphy or Steve Ursig like actual 5-round fights before they get to these big fights, but hey, at least we can feature them on the main card. Maybe actually feature meaningful fights, meaningful fighters who are actually in good divisions, in good matchups. I don't know. Maybe get those off the prelims.
Nah,
I
dog.
will
We need
say
more
there's-
Marcin Tybura main events.
I will say there's
that's
one
what we
good
need.
thing
We need
about
more.
getting, random heavyweight matchups to headline Apex shows. Dan Tom's rants. I mean, just spectacular stuff here from Dan. So there is that plus. Guys, let's move on to the next topic. Retirement. Matt Brown walked away from the sport just in a single tweet. He did an interview with MMA Junkie Radio as to discussing why. You can check that after this show. Full length of the interview is about close to like 30 minutes. Very good interview. He gives a good insight as to why he walked away. Let's start here. Are we surprised that he left the sport? Because it kind of felt like, he had been doing good in recent fights. His name, I feel like, oddly enough, has been the strongest it's been in some time. Are we surprised that he's walking away from the sport, especially not even announcing it and then fighting, but just on a random tweet and on a random day, just walking away from something he's been doing for decades?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm surprised necessarily. I mean, he's 43 years old, right? And he's kind of just one of those guys that's been kind of hovering around, just like wins and losses, never really getting like a true momentum, in recent years to, make a real strong push. But he's consistently been one of the most entertaining guys. I think he's, obviously been a fan favorite for a very long time now, because we know he's going to go in there and scrap. And, again, like I said earlier in the show, results be damned, like with Derrick Lewis, right? You know what you're going to get with Matt Brown. Matt Brown's going to come and try to knock your head off. And if he gets caught with a counter shot or something like that and gets put down, oh, well, we'll see you again, in a few more months, and we'll do the same song and dance again. But you're always going to tune in for a Matt Brown fight, because they're more often than not very entertaining fights. And he's going to deliver some highlights as well on his end. But the retirement didn't necessarily surprise me. It's just one of those things. You're kind of in the gym and you're just like, what the hell with this? I don't know how long it's going to last, though, because, I mean, hell, hashtag MMA retirements, right?
Yeah. We'll get into that in just a few seconds. But real quick, Mike, he did say he wasn't bitter at his retirement, but then he followed up with some comments saying that this wasn't his ideal way to walk away. He wanted to be on UFC 300. He made that pretty clear to the UFC brass. That wish was not granted, and that's when he was like, the hell with it. I'm not doing this any longer. Fouled by the UFC for not putting such a beloved and experienced name on UFC 300.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because he said basically that like he thought he was going to fight Jim Miller, and he was preparing for that. Jim Miller said he wanted that fight originally. It was a great thing, the all-time wins leader versus the man with the most welterweight knockouts. Like, it was a nice little story there, but I understand the UFC's perspective as well. Like, I know Bobby Green is long in the tooth as well, but he's a guy that seems to be in like one of the best moments of his career, is having some upward trajectory despite the setback against Jalen Turner. And maybe they feel like if someone's going to beat Jim Miller, we'd rather have a guy who can give us some more after that rather than someone who's going to retire in the cage and walk away. Like, I can understand that line of thinking. Would I have liked to see Matt Brown get that moment on that stage to retire and walk away, win or lose? Yeah, that would have been fantastic. It would have been a nice little storyline for that card for that night. And given the way the fights played out, maybe Jim Miller would have had a better chance of winning in that particular matchup, given how bad it went for him against Bobby Green. But yeah, like a little bit of a bummer to hear him say that, even if it was a different fight. Yeah. You always want to see these people get like a proper farewell. Didn't work out. I appreciate that they gave him like the video package and stuff on the broadcast on Saturday. That was nice. Usually we see fighters retire and they don't even get, a tip of the hat from the UFC in the least way, even if it's just a tweet. He got a tweet and a video, so good for him. They appreciate him. But yeah, like he seemed ready to finish this career off. He just didn't get his fairy tale ending, which, hey, it's MMA, buddy. That happens for almost no one. So it's
Mike,
fitting.
I agreed with everything you said, but I'm gonna add a little parenthesis and put yet. Right? Maybe.
Well, I think he's done with the UFC. I think
Yeah.
that's clear. But in the same interview, he's like, I'll fight, like I'm not gonna rule out BKFC, but I'm not picking up the phone for anything less than $1 million. So I think his MMA UFC career is done. He submitted the retirement paperwork. He's out of the testing pool. He confirmed all that. So I don't even know what it means to come back. Could he fight next weekend and get back in that pool? I have no idea how the rules work at this point, but he seems like he's moving on. And his interview, glad that you shouted out, watch that. All of his points, his logic was very sound. His reasoning, wants to shift focus to his family, his coworkers, said he's left people at his gym hanging in terms of like giving them the resources they need, pay increases, all that stuff. So he seems to be doing this for the right reasons. So I can respect that.
Matt, do you agree, or do you think we'll see him again in the octagon?
I think, well, not in the octagon. I think we'll see him again in some form of combat sport at some point. I think karate combat would fit him well as well. Like there's so many options these days for guys to just, kind of have their post little UFC run. I wouldn't be surprised to see him put on a pair of boxing gloves. Who knows? Maybe like one of these misfit shows or like a Jake Paul card or something like that. Who knows? There's just,
good luck
there's
fighting
options
that guy, right? To whatever influencer is going to pick a fight with him. Good luck. Dan, real quick, what's sort of his legacy? Because it's weird, right? Like he didn't fight for the title. I guess he was briefly a title contender for some time. But he's not a former champion or anything like that. Yet he's one of the names that stand out. And look, as Mike said, like we don't see very often that the UFC puts a graphic or a sort of package on the broadcast acknowledging somebody's retirement. And they did for Matt Brown on a card that he wasn't even competing in. So clearly he means something for the company. What is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine, the fact that they did that for him means something. The fact that Matt Brown, apparently, according to his own words, was on a date and that helped him out. I'm sure Matt Brown, maybe is a little happier with the UFC after that. But in all seriousness, I'm going to stick to what I said on the last episode of Spinning Back Clique I was on. I would have loved to still seen, give him another veteran fight against like Jorge Masvidal, throw the BMF belt on a technicality since Masvidal was the first. And, if we don't want to count his loss to Usman for a title, maybe, he can still mythically have it at welterweight. You throw that as a co-main event. It's a good respect for both guys. And regardless of whether you believe Matt Brown deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, I think that, even if you don't believe it, when he has a BMF belt, around his shoulder, it still looks cool. It's still deserving for the guy. It still adds to his legacy. And I think that's a good way to kind of reward both guys, as gimmicky as that belt is and as unserious as it is. I would love to see Matt Brown come back for that because hashtag MMA retirements. I just hope that he understands his contract like Jose Aldo did. So we don't see him like begrudgingly kind of coming back. And then it's like, it's a lot of these fighters, not only a lot of fighters, no offense, guys, you guys don't know the rules and the judging that you go under. You guys also don't even know your own contracts a lot of the times, which is what we're finding out in defense of these fighters. For a lot of the times we're seeing them come out of retirement. A lot of times it's contracts though, folks.
Yeah, and great shout for Jose Aldo there. He was out for almost 2 years and then came back. Look, I feel like he'll fight again, perhaps in the UFC. I just have a feeling that dude's not done fighting. But I don't know. Let's pretend. Let's believe him. Let's take his word that he is done. Guys, favorite moment of Matt Brown's career? I mean, Cold Coffee was just playing some highlights there. I mean, one of the most brutal, one of the most ruthless fighters out there, right?
I'll give mine real quick. Mine was, I know what a lot of people, have as theirs, but mine personally was the Diego Sanchez knockout. Because that ended a skid, a brutal skid of 3 knockout losses for him. And it was like to the point, like we thought he was done. Right. And I was at that one. I was at the Donald Cerrone fight, in Toronto. I was there for that. And it was just like, I think this is like the last time we see him fight. And then he just rebounded, came and just smashed Diego Sanchez with that elbow, that bonus winning elbow, man. That was a crazy sort of like resurgent moment for him in his career there.
Mike?
Yeah, I think those guys pretty much nailed it there. Those are some great ones. Even in a losing effort, his fight with Robbie Lawler was pretty good, and that's the one that kind of ended his title run, so to speak. He had the 7 straight victories in the welterweight division. That was a title eliminator for him, right? And he couldn't get over the hump, but he fought valiantly. And yeah, I mean, these are all great highlights. He's a violence machine, but I hope not to be mean here, throwing shade or anything. We're not serious about Hall of Fame and BMF belts and stuff with Matt Brown, right? That's not serious.
I'm down for the BMF belt. I think that's silly enough to where it doesn't matter who, as long as somebody is reputationally enough. But yeah, I don't know about Hall of Fame.
He would be the B side of that, though. It'd have to be.
Hall of Fame,
Sure.
That's a weird one because I think the argument we all use is if Cerrone made it the UFC Hall of Fame, all of a sudden a lot of people can.
Yeah, he doesn't even hit the Cerrone threshold for me, though, right? Like, he's more in line with like the Jim Miller conversation, I think, if you're going to line up accolades. But like, he didn't fight for a title. He didn't even get to that point, which Donald Cerrone at least did a couple times, I think. So yeah, that one for me, like Matt Brown, great action fighter, but he feels like more the definition of like a longevity guy. And that's how he got that. Obviously the most welterweight knockouts is a historic achievement. No one is even close to him in that category right now, but yeah, like all that stuff.
But all this strengthens our argument for why these Apex shows are brutal. Because again, whether it's failed title, momentum like Ponzinibbio, at least Ponzinibbio still had that moment, right, in his home country. Remember how big that was, getting that finish?
That was huge.
And then Matt Brown, Eric Silva's got to be up there for me. Speaking of Ohio and their great live shows for Stipe, Ohio showed up for Matt Brown as well in that great fight, right? That's one of that's on my top 5 all-time welterweight fights. It should be on everybody's top 5. And that alone, you can agree with Matt or Mike as far as no Hall of Fame, no BMF. That's totally cool. I think it's way cooler to have like one of the arguably top 5 best fights in your division. And Matt Brown has that. And why did he have that? It's because the UFC was actually building up fighters, actually caring about their card structures, cared about servicing the fans. Remember back when Dana White vlog days where it was all about servicing the fans? And that's what we got, folks. I know Dana White says that we're just complaining because we're scumbag media who all we do is try to take down the sport. But if you listen to what we're actually saying, we're wanting what? Better fights, better entertainment for you, better conditions for the fighters. Like, who is losing here that matters? You know what I'm saying? I guess we're just scumbags for wanting these things, folks. I don't know.
Maybe you can get Matt Brown to brand scumbag media on your shoulder. That would be a nice thing. I do think that's how he makes the Hall of Fame, though. That Eric Silva is probably a Hall of Fame fight. That's how he makes it in there. But even Chael Sonnen has said himself, just because you are in a Hall of Fame fight doesn't make you a true UFC Hall of Famer. So.
True.
True. Yep, couldn't agree more. All right, guys. Final topic here. Let's look ahead at the weekend. So we got Bellator or PFL. I don't even know what to call it anymore, but we got the Bellator Championship Series Paris brought to you by the PFL going up against the UFC. One's on Friday, one's on Saturday, but still competing for that weekend attention. What are we looking at here? What do you think is the most interesting card, guys? Let's start with Mike. What are you eyeing here between these two events?
So my birthday is this weekend, so I'm taking the weekend off and getting blackout and enjoying this.
You're telling me you're not going to have your phone?
I'm thinking no,
and
but
the results on MMAJunkie.com. No,
maybe we'll see. We'll see how good it goes. But and more sincerely, I think like the UFC card top to bottom probably better, but the fight I'm most intrigued in of the whole weekend is Patchy Mix versus Magomedov, and I think that's a great fight. And Patchy Mix is arguably the best bantamweight in the world. So anytime he gets to compete, I think it's a treat and something you need to go out of your way to watch. That's Friday. Obviously, Cedric Doumbé is intriguing as well, given what happened in his last fight. How does he rebound from that? So I do think the more interesting matchup is Patchy Mix, maybe the most interesting fighter, but I think the UFC probably just, it's a UFC card. It's going to be better top to bottom than pretty much anything else a rival promotion can put on, except for minor exceptions.
Yeah. Matt, Dan, what do you guys think?
I think, like what Mike said, overall, I think the UFC card is better, but you get the opportunity to see one of the best fighters in the world in Patchy Mix on the Bellator side. But I do like this entire main card in the UFC, man. Like each fight is interesting for the main card. As Dan, I think, kind of hinted at earlier, like we have a solid main card with no fights higher than 170 pounds. So it should be a lot of good action, a lot of solid matchups. And there's a lot of names that I'm interested to see how they perform. You know, Angela Hill, I want to see how Adrian Yanez bounces back. Obviously, Thimba Grimbo, like his story, will he continue his nice start to his UFC run? Chaos Williams is back as well. And then, of course, the main event, I think is just going to be a banger for however long it lasts. If it goes a distance, whatever, I think it's going to be a whole lot of violence in that one. So I just think top to bottom, the UFC card's more interesting, but you have to watch the Patchy Mitts fight at some point, whether you watch it live or watch it on replay, whatever. You got to check that fight out for sure.
Dan, let me ask you about Patchy Mix. This card goes down on a Friday. I think we all agree that's probably the more interesting fight, and maybe even the most relevant, right? Like a lot of people are considering Patchy Mix to be, maybe the best bantamweight on the planet. I don't know if we're having the same conversation for Barbosa and Murphy, but is he or is he not? And how close do you put him among the best? Because it's hard to gauge always with fighters competing outside of the UFC. But from what you've seen with Patchy Mix, is he one of the best fighters in the world? Bantamweights?
It is. Yeah, it is very tough. And I would think that you're not crazy to make that argument, even based on what we've seen and going off of his ceiling for potential. The guy's a huge bantamweight. I think that's the biggest enemy, is him being able to consistently make that weight. I think we've seen pictures now that he's training at Extreme Couture. You see him next to like former 135ers, but 145ers now, like Aljo and other 145ers. And he's bigger than these guys, And even speaking to 145ers in the gym, and I don't speak, I try to not speak out of school, but I feel like this is fair. And I will just say that if you think Patchy Mix is just, athletic or just grapply or just a back take guy, do not sleep on his striking. I've had it on very good authority that, he is giving some very noted strikers who are known for their knockouts. And I'm asking these guys, because I train under them, how Patchy Mix, how it's like going with Patchy. And even just in the striking, they're saying that, he does better than fighters that you'd be like, no way, he's more of a tough challenge in the striking department than that fighter. Well, apparently that's the word on the ground. So this guy is still growing, still getting better. I'm really excited for Patchy Mix. Great shout this weekend, guys. It's definitely the fight I'm looking forward to most, despite shouts to the UFC for finally giving us like a 145 headliner, despite, doing Lerone Murphy dirty and burying him on the prelims all this time. But that is nice to see. That's nice to see UFC.
Real quick, let's go around prediction. Magomedov, that dude's tough. He's pretty damn good against Patchy Mix. Prediction. Is it unanimous? We're all going with Patchy Mix on this one?
Mix.
Yeah, we've seen it before, so we'll repeat it, I think.
So sorry?
We've seen it before, so I think we'll repeat it. Yep.
All right, let's talk about the UFC now. That'll be going down on Saturday. Edson Barbosa versus Lerone Murphy headlining this event. This is just pure heaven right now for Dan Tom, getting 245ers to headline a card. So pretty damn good fight here. Let's talk about these two guys individually. Let's start first with Barbosa. I believe he's on a 2-fight win streak. Has looked pretty damn good recently. He's up there in age, but all of a sudden it kind of feels like he's having like a second heir to his career. Will it be enough to make a title run? What do you guys think? Let's start with Mike. Does Edson Barbosa have another title run in him?
Man, featherweight's just too tough. I'd like to say yes. But man, I just don't think he's going to be able to get through all these killers. Like, they're putting in some tough fights, but I do think he's capable of beating some of these dudes. He's on sharp. He's got the weight cut, obviously nailed at this point, and the most fight of the night bonuses in UFC history. So that's a pretty awesome accolade. And I could very easily see him getting one more to the list there.
Matt, what do you think? You got faith on Barbosa?
No, I see. I like Murphy in this fight. I mean, obviously, just because of his record and what he's done so far in the UFC, but I think it's just like a kind of one of those crossroads fights, right? And then also, if you look at Barbosa in main events, he's 1-3 in UFC main events, so that record doesn't bode very well for him as well. But it would be different if it was a co-main. He's 6-3 in co-mains. When
that's the whole difference, right? You just fought a little bit earlier.
Tough style to fight over 5 rounds.
Exactly. So I like Murphy in this spot though, but it very well could be a fight of the night, back and forth sort of war that we just saw with him and Youssef.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, just real quick on Lerone Murphy's upside. As you mentioned, this is a guy that for whatever reason, he's kind of been buried, but he's been fucking killing it at 145 pounds. I'm not sure why he hasn't gotten more attention, why the UFC hasn't really tried to push him further. Keeping in mind, he does have an important market behind him. He's finally getting some shine here. Main event, nice name in Edson Barbosa. What's his upside? Are we looking at a future champion, title contender? What should people know about him?
See, this is the tough part because I'm paid to break down cards from top to bottom, right? So that's how I have to prioritize. I do the main events first, and then I go to the main cards. That's why I'm very upset with the way they book it, because I know that I'm going to, no matter what, I'm going to have to break down fighters on the main card. And prelim fighters, I don't often get a chance to get around to. And even on fight night, I'm just so busy and dedicating my so much time to having these wrong takes and picks come fight night, which is amazing feeling, by the way, that I barely have time to watch the prelims. This is why I get particularly annoyed, because then it comes time to have to write a fighter profile where, in my defense, you go to MMAJunkie.com for my in-depths, to not just for the technical stuff, but I'll give you like backgrounds in their martial arts. Like you'll find stuff about like their regional stuff, or martial arts and their regional. Like I go over everything in those things, but unfortunately, those things take me a while to do, and they come out late week. I don't know. The last one came out on Saturday, so I don't know if all my breakdowns are coming out fight day, which that means you guys have to wait till then. And UFC broadcasters, if you're listening, I know your hay is already in the barn by then, so hit me up if you need any southpaw stats or anything like that. But yeah, I got to honestly look more into Murphy. So as embarrassing as it is for the analysts to not have takes, it's also kind of tough because we just turn around from this. And again, I actually got to show my work on multiple platforms and mediums. I can't just willy-nilly be like, hey, he's the favorite, he's the young guy, he's going to win. But the odds makers and the public are favoring Lerone Murphy. We'll see where I end up. We're going to have to, check out my in-depth breakdown on fight day, probably for MMA Junkie.
All right, guys.
Good
Stay
plug.
tuned. Yeah, great plug. Stay tuned for that. Looking forward to that analysis, Dan. Thank you guys so much for your input here. Mike, Dan, Matt, you guys did great. Remember, guys, give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. We'll be covering everything mixed martial arts. I believe MMA Junkie has the most well-rounded and most comprehensive coverage of the mixed martial arts world. So make sure to stay tuned in to everything that we do here. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Spinning Back Clique. We'll see you guys next week. Now go out there and be a campeón. You guys like that?